The apartment was on the eastern edge of the Korovin estate, past the gardens and the guest wings, in a building that had been a steward's residence 2 generations ago. The clan had cleared it out and given it to Edrin after Valar was born. No one had said the word separation. No one had needed to. Selira lived in the main house with her parents and the baby, and Edrin lived here, and the arrangement was permanent. He kept it clean. He cooked for himself when he remembered to eat. He visited the medical wing when they let him, and sometimes when they did not, and he had developed a quiet talent for being present in rooms where no one had invited him. Valar was 3 months old. He had spent 2 of them in the Korovin medical wing. The healers used careful words: channel imbalance, elemental overflow. The body is struggling to hold what it was given. Edrin had asked, the first week, what that meant in plain language. The senior healer, a woman who had served the Korovin line for 40 years and had no patience for outsiders married into it, had looked at him and said, "It means he was born with too much. The air channel is the weakest. When it fails, the rest follow." Edrin had nodded and thanked her and gone back to the apartment, and sat at the kitchen table for several hours without turning on the light. The first dream came in the 7th week. He felt like he was burning up from the inside out while drowning. The 2 things were happening at once, and neither was happening to him. He was watching from inside a chest that was not his, feeling lungs that could not decide what they were, and the smallness of the body was what woke him. He sat up in the dark, already pulling on clothes, and he was halfway down the estate path before he registered where he was. The night attendant at the medical wing was used to him. She unlocked the inner door without speaking and went back to her station. Valar was in the small crib by the window. The monitoring crystals along the wall pulsed in uneven intervals, and a healer's apprentice slept upright in the chair across the room with a chart in her lap. Edrin stood over the crib for a long moment and looked at his son, who was the color of paper and whose breath came in short, uneven pulls, and he put his hand on the baby's chest because that was what fathers did. Something moved. He did not have language for it then. He registered only a sensation of weight transferring, a pressure leaving the small body and arriving in his own, and a heat behind his eyes that was not tears. Valar's breathing slowed. The crystals on the wall pulsed once, twice, and settled into a rhythm Edrin had not heard them hold before. "He's stable," she said. The apprentice woke up. She looked at the crystals, then at Edrin, then at the crib, and her face did something complicated. The apprentice woke up. She looked at the crystals, then at Edrin, then at the crib, and her face did something complicated. "I know," Edrin said, and he did not know how he knew. He stayed another hour. When the morning shift came in, the senior healer credited a tincture she had administered before bed and made a note to increase the dose. Edrin walked back to the apartment as the sun came up. He was dizzy and could not remember why he had gone. The second dream came 8 days later. This one was less frightening because he half recognized it. He woke with the same pulling sensation behind his sternum and the same certainty that he needed to be in the medical wing within the hour. He went. He put his hand on Valar's chest. The baby's breathing eased. Edrin stayed until dawn, and when he stood up to leave, he had to brace himself against the wall because the room had tilted slightly, and the tilt did not correct itself for almost a minute. He walked home through the gardens. The wrongness in his chest hummed for the rest of the morning and faded by lunch, and he told himself he had not been sleeping well, which was true, and that this explained it, which was not. The third dream came 4 nights after that. He went. He touched the baby. He went home. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time and watched his hands shake, and he understood that something was happening that he did not have a word for, and that he should probably tell someone. He did not tell anyone. By the end of the 2nd month, Valar had gone 3 weeks without a critical episode. The healers were cautiously optimistic. Selira sent Edrin a brief message through the household courier, the first communication between them in 9 weeks. He is doing better. The healers say the worst may be behind us. He read it twice and put it in the drawer where he kept the others. He had lost 12 pounds. His skin had taken on a gray cast at the temples and along the line of his jaw, and his hair had gone brittle. He had begun coughing in the mornings, and the cough did not produce anything, which alarmed him more than if it had. He went to a clinic in the lower city, not a Korovin one, a small place where the practitioner did not know his name and had no reason to report on him. The doctor was a tired man in his 60s who took Edrin's pulse and pressed on his abdomen and looked into his eyes with a small lensed instrument and frowned for a long time without speaking. "You are not eating," the doctor said finally. "I am eating. I do not have a gift." "Then you are not absorbing what you eat, or something is taking it. Before you can, are you using your gift heavily?" "Then you are not absorbing what you eat, or something is taking it. Before you can, are you using your gift heavily?" The doctor looked at him for longer than was comfortable. "Sir," he said, "I have been doing this for 41 years, and I am telling you that something inside you is consuming a great deal of energy. If it is not your gift, it is something else, and I would recommend finding out what." Edrin paid him and left. He walked home along the river path. It was a clear afternoon, and the light on the water was the kind of light he had liked when he was younger, before he had learned to mistrust the things he liked. He sat on a bench halfway up the path and worked through what he knew. The dreams came when Valor was in distress. When he touched the child, the distress moved. It did not vanish, it moved. It came into him, and his body held it, and his body was beginning to fail because it was not built to hold what a Korovin body was built to hold. And what a Korovin body was failing to hold his own body was holding, by some accident of the spirit blood, his ancestors had thinned to almost nothing. He sat on the bench for a long time. He thought about the years ahead. He thought about how many episodes a child like Valor might have between 3 months and adulthood, and what each one would cost, and whether his body could absorb that amount. He did not think it could. He was resolved to do it anyway. He went home. He slept badly. The next morning he made breakfast and ate all of it, and he went to the lower city and bought tonics the clinic doctor had suggested, and he ate a second breakfast, and he began the slow work of becoming a man who would do anything to protect his child. 2 nights later the dream came again. He went to the medical wing. The night attendant unlocked the inner door. Valor was struggling, his small chest rising in the wrong rhythm, the crystals on the wall pulsing red. Edrin sat down beside the crib and put his hand on his son's chest. He felt the weight begin to move, and he let it. He thought, "I can carry this." He thought, "He will not remember any of this, and that is fine, because none of this is for him to carry." He thought about Celira, who would not be told, and the Korovin healers, who would credit their tinctures, and the clan, who would never know, and he found that he did not mind. The baby's breathing slowed. The crystals settled. Edrin sat in the chair beside the crib and watched his son sleep, and he was resolved to see it through for as long as he was able to. Welcome to the Portal Library. Step through and let the magic begin. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday. Hollow Inheritance, a fantasy story. Chapter 1:11. Edrin woke at 5 and lay in the dark for a few minutes staring at the ceiling. The left hand was steady today. The headache was a low one. The taste in his mouth was the metallic one he had learned to associate with the days after a bad absorption, but he had not done a bad absorption in over a week, which meant it was probably just how his body was now. He got up slowly, careful not to stand abruptly. The apartment had not changed in 11 years. There were tonics on the kitchen counter in 3 rows, organized by what they were meant to compensate for. There was a chart on the wall by the door that tracked his weight, his pulse, and the dates of recent absorption episodes. There was a small notebook on the table where he wrote down what he had eaten and when, because his body no longer reliably told him whether it had been fed. He made tea. He drank it standing at the window. The eastern wing of the Korovin estate was visible through the trees, and beyond it the main house, where his wife and his son were presumably still asleep. There was a knock at the back door. Tommen did not wait for him to answer. The groundskeeper let himself in, and he set a folded paper on the kitchen table and went to the stove to start himself a cup of tea without speaking. He was a stocky man in his 50s, with a face that had given up on expression long ago. He had been the one to find Edrin collapsed in the gardens after a particularly bad absorption when Valor was 3, and he had carried Edrin back to the apartment without asking questions, and he had been bringing news ever since. "Council session this afternoon," Tommen said. 2 o'clock, the boys being presented. Edrin opened the paper. It was a copy of the day's council agenda lifted from somewhere. He read it twice. "They're presenting him at 11, he said. "They are." "That's early, it is." Edrin sighed, folded the paper, and set it down. Valor's name was listed under the third item on the agenda, alongside the formal designation heir presumptive, House Korovin, which had been added to his name 2 years ago, and which Edrin still found strange to read. Below the boy's name was the standard formula: demonstration of elemental channels, public affirmation. "4 elements?" Edrin asked. "All 4, including Heir." He had assumed as much. The Korovin Council would not present the boy publicly without showing all of them. The point of the presentation was to show that the line had a future, and the future required the full inheritance to be visible. Edrin set down the cup. "Thank you, Tommen. You'll be there, right?" "I'll be there." Tommen finished his tea standing at the counter. He rinsed the cup and set it on the rack to dry. He paused at the door before he left. "You look bad today," he said. "I'm all right." "You're not, but knowing you, you'll go anyway." "I'll go anyway." Tommen nodded once and let himself out. Edrin spent the rest of the morning preparing. He ate breakfast and then ate a second breakfast an hour later. He took the 3 tonics that he had learned to take before any session he expected to be hard. He drank water until his stomach hurt. He laid out clothes that were unremarkable, a dark coat that had been good once and was now serviceable, a shirt clean enough to pass, trousers that fit him better than they used to because he had stopped losing weight last year and started slowly putting it back on, which he counted as a victory. He looked at himself in the small mirror by the door before he left. The face that looked back was supposed to be of a 43-year-old, but he looked much older. The gray had moved from his temples into the rest of his hair years ago. There were lines around his mouth that had been put there by a decade of holding still through pain. His eyes were the same vivid green eyes he had always had, which surprised him sometimes when he caught them at the wrong angle. He locked the apartment behind him and walked toward the council hall. He walked slowly because walking quickly cost more than he could afford to spend before 2 o'clock. The path took him through the lower gardens, past the steward's offices, and out through the east gate of the estate. He nodded at the gate guard, who did not nod back but who did not stop him either, which was the arrangement they had settled into over the years. The council hall was in the central district. He had time. He stopped at a tea house halfway and sat for 20 minutes with a small cup he did not really want because his legs had begun to protest. He arrived at the hall at 1:40. The council hall was an old building, built when the great clans had still pretended to share power equally, and it had a circular floor with tiered seating around it, and a domed ceiling painted with the symbols of the 4 elements. The 5th element was not painted anywhere, because the 5th element was no longer politely discussed. Edrin took a place along the back wall. The back wall was where standing observers gathered minor relations of clan members, household staff, citizens with petitions waiting to be heard later in the session. No one greeted him. A clan steward 2 rows in front of him glanced over his shoulder, registered Edrin's presence, and turned back to the floor without acknowledging him. This was the standard Corvin response to his existence, and Edrin had stopped finding it painful several years ago. The Corvin section was in the front. He picked them out in the order he always did. Celira's father, white-haired now, seated at the center. Celira's mother to his right. The senior elders along the same row. Celira herself 1 row back in the dark blue the Corvin women wore for formal sessions, her hair pinned in the older style. She looked tired. Valar was in the children's section, at the front of the floor. Edrin let his eyes rest on his son, for as long as he could stand too. The boy was tall for being 11. He had Celira's hair and her cheekbones and her straight-backed way of sitting in formal company. He was dressed in the formal gray of a Corvin heir presumptive, with the 4-element pin on his collar that the clan had given him when his channels had stabilized at age 9. He was speaking quietly to the boy beside him, a younger child from one of the allied houses. Edrin had not been close enough to speak to his son in 7 months. He had seen him at 3 public events since then, and he had absorbed for him at 2 of those, and the boy had not noticed any of it because the boy had no reason to notice. Edrin watched him now and tried to memorize the angle of his jaw, which had changed since the last time, and the new way he held his shoulders, which was more like Celira's brother than like anyone else. Celira found him across the hall. Their eyes met for less than a second. Her expression loosened slightly, recognition, nothing more, and then she turned back to the floor. The session began. The first 2 items on the agenda were procedural. Edrin used the time to settle his breathing and run through the absorption preparations he had developed over the years. He could not predict when Valar would need him, but he could be ready. The 3rd item was called. A clan elder Edrin did not recognize stood and read the formal introduction. Valar of House Corvin, born of Celira Corvin and her household, presented today before this council in his 11th year for the public affirmation of his elemental inheritance. 4 channels active: earth, water, fire, air. The elder's voice carried the small pride that Corvin elders always carried when they said 4 channels active. It was a phrase that had not been said about a Corvin child in 23 years since Halrin. Valar stood and walked to the center of the floor. He bowed to the council, then to his clan, then to the assembled benders. He took his stance. The hall went quiet. Earth first. He knelt and pressed his palms to the stone floor, and a slab of it rose smoothly under his right hand and rotated and settled again, the edges clean, the motion controlled. The hall murmured approval. Edrin allowed himself a small breath. Earth had always been Valar's most stable element. Water second. A young attendant brought a basin to the floor. Valar drew the water out in a long ribbon, twisted it through 3 figures, returned it to the basin without spilling. Clean. Edrin watched his son's hands, and his son's hands were steady. Fire third. The attendants cleared a wider radius. Valar produced a controlled flame in his right palm, shaped it into a slow rotating disc, expanded it, contracted it, extinguished it in a single breath. The hall murmured louder. A few of the older firebenders nodded in approval. Air last. Edrin's hands tightened. Valar took his stance for the air sequence, and Edrin saw the small thing he always saw, the half-second hesitation, the way the boy's shoulders rose slightly to compensate for the channel that did not fully cooperate. The boy began the form. He raised his hands. He drew air toward himself, shaped it, began to send it outward in the controlled column that the form required. The column came out ragged. It was small. The boy was 11 and his control was good, and most of the hall would not see the raggedness because most of the hall was not watching for it. But Edrin knew, and Celira's father seems to also be aware of that. The senior healer in the 2nd row was watching for it. The column pulsed once where it should have flowed. and Valar's color changed, and his hands began the small tremor Edrin had been watching from a distance for 10 years. The boy could not stop. He was being presented to the council of all 4 great clans, and stopping was not an option. He held the form, and Edrin watched the boy's body begin to fight him. Edrin closed his eyes. He had practiced this for years and gotten better at it, and it still cost him dearly. He found the connection to his son, something his ancestors might have had a word for, something he had only ever felt, and he reached along it and pulled. The instability moved. It came across the hall in something that was not a current but that behaved like one, and it arrived in his chest, and it spread through his ribs and his lungs and the small bones at the base of his neck, and he held it. In the center of the floor, Valar's air column smoothed. The pulse evened. The boy completed the form, brought his hands down, and bowed. The hall applauded. Edrin opened his eyes. The room had tilted. He was leaning against the back wall, and the wall was holding most of his weight, and he made his hands relax their grip on the stone behind him. He counted to 10. The room slowly corrected. His vision cleared. No one had looked at him. Selira's face in the front row had loosened with relief. Her father was nodding with a small, satisfied nod he gave to outcomes that confirmed his expectations. Valar was returning to the children's section, accepting quiet congratulations from the boys around him, his color already coming back. Edrin watched his son cross the floor. The boy's eyes swept the hall as he sat down, a trained acknowledgement of the room after a presentation. The eyes passed across the back wall. They went over Edrin without slowing. The boy sat down beside his cousin and accepted a cup of water and did not look back. Edrin stayed for the 4th item on the agenda because leaving early would have drawn attention. He did not hear any of it. He stood at the back wall and worked through the slow management of what he was holding, which was settling now into the long ache that would be with him for the next several days. When the session broke, he slipped out through the side door before the Corvin section stood. He did not want Selira to feel obligated to acknowledge him in the corridor. He did not want to be in the building when his son walked past him in the hall. He made it 3 blocks before he had to sit down. There was a low wall along the river path, and he sat on it and breathed and waited for his hands to stop shaking. A woman walking a small dog asked if he was unwell. He said he was fine. She gave him a look strangers gave him sometimes, pitying him as a man who was either very ill or very poor or both, and she walked on. He sat on the wall for 40 minutes. He stood up carefully and walked the rest of the way home. He ate when he got back to the apartment. He did not want to, but he ate anyway, because eating was part of the work now, and the work was not optional. He took his evening tonics. He wrote in the notebook on the table, Council, 2 p.m., Heir. Heavy, and he closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. He went to bed at 7 and slept until 5 the next morning, which was twice as long as he usually slept, and he woke up still tired. He lay in the dark for a long time thinking about his son. The boy was 11. There would be a presentation every season now, and council sessions, and the formal trainings, and the public demonstrations. The clan used to remind the other clans that the Corvin line had a 4-element heir for the first time in a generation. Each of these would push Valar, and each push would reach the air channel, and the air channel would do what the air channel always did, and Edrin would be there. Edrin got out of bed at 5:30 and went to the kitchen and made himself breakfast in the dark. The boy did not know, and the boy would not know. He would grow up strong, and the clan would have its heir, and somewhere along the way Edrin would either find a way to last or he would not, and either way the boy would be all right. He sat at the kitchen table and ate his breakfast and watched the sky go from black to gray through the window, and he made the decision again, as he had every morning now, and as he would keep making it for as long as his body would let him. Chapter 2: The Garden. Late autumn was the worst season for the air channel. Edrin had learned this over the years. The body held absorbed elements differently as the months changed, and air, once carried, ran thinnest and coldest in the dry stretch between the harvest and the first snow. He woke each morning of October and November with the sense that something in his chest had not refilled overnight, and he spent the first hour of every day teaching himself to breathe deeply enough to last until evening. This October had been worse than most. Heir was in the intensive training phase that followed the spring presentation, and the boy was being pushed hard in all 4 channels at once. Edrin had been carrying something almost every day for 3 weeks. He had stopped weighing himself. He had stopped writing in the notebook because it cost more energy to write than the entries were worth. Tommen came by less often now. When he did come, he looked at Edrin without speaking, drank his tea, and left the folded paper on the table. The folded paper that morning was different. It was not from the council agenda. It was a kitchen rumor written in Tommen's careful handwriting. Incident at the boys' training yard yesterday afternoon. V's fire went wide. Wall scorched. No injuries, healers called. Edrin read it twice and set it down. He had not been there. He had been at the lower city clinic for a scheduled check, 2 miles from the estate, and the connection did not reach that far reliably. The boy had been alone with his instability for the first time since spring. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time and worked through what he knew. Heir had been alone. The fire had gone wide. No one had been hurt, which meant the boy had pulled it back himself, which meant he had managed it without Edrin, albeit badly. The next time he might not be able to pull it back on time. Edrin needed to be closer. Not at the training yard. The clan would have him removed within the hour, but within range somehow. He spent the next afternoon walking the southern perimeter of the Korovin estate. The training fields ran along the inside of the south wall, and the wall itself was old enough to have public paths along its outer edge. He walked the paths and tested the connection at intervals, reaching for his son without touching. 3 blocks south of the wall, the connection thinned. 2 blocks south, it held but only barely. 1 block south, it was clean. There was a small public garden 1 block south of the wall. It was a quiet place. A few benches, a fountain that no longer worked, a row of plum trees that had stopped fruiting a decade ago. The people who came here were retirees with newspapers and women feeding birds, and the occasional tutor with a child too young for school. No one stayed long. No one paid attention to anyone else. Edrin sat on a bench and confirmed the connection, strong and clear. He came back the next day and the day after that. He bought a book at a second-hand shop in the lower city and brought it with him. He did not read it. He sat with it open on his lap and watched the gate of the training yard through the wall, and he held himself ready. On the 4th day the pull came. It was mid-afternoon. The garden was nearly empty. Edrin felt the familiar tug behind his sternum, sharper than usual, and he closed his eyes and reached. The boy was pushing fire. The instability ran into the air channel and the channel was failing again, and Heir was holding the form because he did not know how to do otherwise. Edrin pulled. The instability moved. It came across the wall and into him, and his ribs went hot, and his vision narrowed to the edge of the bench. He gripped the bench with both hands and held still. The pull eased. The boy steadied. Edrin sat with his eyes closed for several minutes and felt the heat settle into the long ache he knew well. When he opened his eyes, there was an old woman sitting on the bench across from him. She was watching him quietly. He nodded at her. She nodded back. She did not ask if he was well, which he was grateful for. She finished feeding her birds and left. Edrin sat for another half-hour before he stood up. He left the garden at dusk through the side gate that opened onto the lane behind the south wall. The lane was narrow and lined with low stone walls and old vines, and it was usually empty in the evenings. He turned the corner at the end of the lane and almost walked into his son. Heir stopped short. The boy was alone, which was the first wrong thing. He was carrying a small training kit slung over his shoulder. He had come out through the south servants' gate of the estate on foot, and he had been heading toward the same lane Edrin had been walking down. Vaylor's face moved through several emotions: surprise, recognition, something Edrin could not name. Then the trained Corvin composure settled over it and the boy bowed slightly. "Father," he said. The word was the formal one. "Vaylor." There was a silence. Edrin held still. The boy was looking at the ground a little to the left of Edrin's feet, the trained Corvin posture for speaking to adults of lower rank. "I hope your training went well today," Edrin said. "It went well, thank you." The boy was lying. Edrin knew because he had been on the other end of the connection an hour earlier and had felt what the boy's body had been doing. He did not say so. "You are walking home alone," Edrin said. "I asked for the time." "Your mother knows." "My tutor knows. She will tell my mother." Another silence. Edrin became aware of his own appearance more sharply than usual. He had been on the bench for 2 hours and the absorption had drained him, and he knew without looking that his color was bad. He held still and hoped the boy would not look at him closely. Then of course Vaylor looked at him. It was a small thing. The boy raised his eyes from the ground and looked at his father's face, and he held the look, and Edrin saw his son's expression change. "Are you well?" Vaylor said. The question surprised Edrin. "I am fine." "You look ill." "I am tired. It has been a long day." Vaylor did not look away. He was studying his father's face now, focused and careful. The boy's eyes moved across his hairline, his cheekbones, the line of his jaw. They settled on his eyes and held. "You should sit down," Vaylor said. "I will when I am home." "You are far from home." "Not very." The boy considered this. He looked once down the lane toward the estate, then back at his father. Then he decided. "Thank you for asking about my training," he said, the formal Corvin phrase. "I should go back. My tutor will worry." "Of course." Vaylor bowed. He walked past Edrin in the lane slowly and turned the corner toward the south gate. He did not look back. Edrin stood in the lane for a minute before he could move. He walked home along the river path and stopped twice to sit. The shaking in his hands took longer than usual to ease. By the time he reached the apartment, the sun was down. He ate, he took the tonics. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the closed notebook for a while before he opened it. He spoke to V for 3 minutes. He called me father. He looked at the entry, tears threatening to spill. He thought about the boy's face and the question the boy had asked. It had been a long time since anyone had asked him that and meant it. He wrote a second line. He looked at me. He closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. He went to bed and slept badly. He woke twice in the night thinking he had heard something, but the apartment was quiet, and the only thing in the room was the dark and his own slow breathing. In the main house, the boy was awake. Vaylor lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was warm and the blankets were heavy, and he could not sleep. His father had looked terrible. That was the thing he kept coming back to. He had seen his father from across rooms many times and from across courtyards, and once from the far end of a hall, but he had never been close enough to see him clearly. Up close, his father was too thin. His skin was the wrong color. He had stood against the wall of the lane like standing was costing him something. Vaylor turned over and pressed his face into the pillow. He thought about his fire that afternoon. It had gone bad. He had not told the tutors how bad it had been because telling them would have meant a healer's visit and a report to his mother and another conversation with his grandfather about discipline. He had held the form and the form had started to slip, and then, suddenly, it had not. The instability had simply gone somewhere. He had finished the sequence. He had told himself it was his breathwork catching up. He had told himself that other times too. The council presentation in the spring. The bad afternoon in the practice hall last summer. The fire drill in the autumn before that, when his hands had started to shake during a sustained burn and then had stopped shaking without explanation. He had told himself a different thing each time, and he had not, until tonight, lined them up next to each other. He lay in the dark wide awake. His father had been at the council presentation. He remembered now. He had seen him at the back of the hall and looked past him because that was what he had been taught to do. He did not know about the practice hall or the fire drill. He did not know about the lane this afternoon, except that he had walked out of the south gate alone and found his father standing at the end of it, looking like a man who had been working. Vaylor sat up. He sat in the dark of his bed for a long time. He did not turn on the light. He thought through what he knew and what he did not know and what he could find out, and his chest felt strange and tight. He thought, I am going to ask someone. Then he thought, I am going to find out for myself first. He lay back down. He did not sleep until almost dawn. I hope you are enjoying this story so far. What would it take for you to forgive your partner if you were in Edrin's position? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 3. What he found out. For a week after their encounter, Vaylor watched and kept a close tab on his father. He started small. Over breakfast he asked his tutor casually whether anyone had been at the south gate the previous afternoon. The tutor said no one had been. He asked one of the kitchen girls whether she had seen the man who sometimes came around the gardens. She said she had, 2 days ago, near the old fountain, sitting with a book. He asked his sparring instructor after a session whether he ever saw observers along the south wall. The instructor said sometimes there were people on the public paths. He had stopped paying attention years ago. Vaylor stopped asking and started observing. He went up to the third-floor window of the East tutoring room before each of his training sessions. The window had a view of the garden over the south wall. The first afternoon he saw nothing. The second afternoon he saw his father on the bench, a book open on his lap. The third afternoon he saw him there again. The fourth and fifth afternoons too. He watched his father during one of the harder fire drills. Edrin sat on the bench. He closed his eyes. A few minutes later on the training floor, Vaylor's flame steadied without explanation. He watched once more, 2 days later, and confirmed it again. Then he stopped watching and stood in the third-floor window for a long time, looking at his hands. He could ask his mother. He could ask his grandfather. He could ask one of the senior healers who probably already suspected something. He decided he was going to ask his father directly. The apartment was on the eastern edge of the estate. Vaylor had never been there. He had walked past the building many times. It had been part of the ground since before he was born, and he had known that his father lived in it, but he had never thought about why. The door was painted dark green and the paint was old. There was no nameplate. He stood in front of it for a minute before he knocked. His father opened the door and stood there without speaking. Edrin's mind went through several thoughts, but he kept his facial expression steady. He stepped back and let the boy in. The apartment was small but clean. There was a kitchen with a table and 2 chairs, a sitting room with a single armchair and a bookshelf, a closed door that probably led to the bedroom. The walls were mostly bare. On the wall by the kitchen there was a chart with numbers on it and dates next to the numbers. On the counter there were 3 rows of small bottles, dark glass, organized by something Vaylor did not understand. He sat at the kitchen table. He had not been invited to sit, but the kitchen table was the only place to sit if he was not going to take the armchair, which felt like his father's chair. Edrin made tea. He moved slowly. Vaylor watched him at the stove and noticed that his father braced one hand against the counter while waiting for the water, and that the bracing looked habitual. The tea came. Edrin sat across from him. "You came to see me," Edrin said. "I came to see where you live." Edrin nodded. He did not say anything else. Vaylor drank the tea. It was strong and a little bitter. He looked at his father's hands on the table, thinner than he remembered, the knuckles more pronounced, the left one with a slight tremor that he had not noticed previously, and he felt the words he had come to say drying up in his mouth. He set down the cup. He said he should go. Edrin nodded. At the door, the boy paused. He turned and looked at his father, who was still standing at the kitchen table. "Thank you for the tea," Valor said. "You are welcome." The boy left. Edrin stood at the table for a long time after the door closed. A week later, Valor came back. This time he brought something. A small bundle wrapped in cloth, a pastry from the household kitchen, one his father had sometimes been given on holidays years ago. The boy did not know whether his father remembered them. He set the bundle on the counter without a word. He sat at the table. Edrin made tea. The boy drank half the cup. Then he set it down and looked at the wall behind his father's shoulder. "Why are you always at the garden when I am training?" Valor said. Edrin had not been expecting it that fast. He sat for a moment with his own cup in his hand. He had thought about this for over 11 years. He had thought about every version of this conversation. He had imagined himself lying, saying he liked the garden, saying he had taken up reading, saying he happened to be there. He had imagined himself deflecting. He had imagined himself saying nothing at all and letting the boy decide what he believed. What he did was set the cup down and tell the truth. "I can take some of what is hurting you," he said. "When you are calling upon the elements, I can pull some of the instability across and hold it for you. I have been doing it since you were 3 months old." The boy did not react, as expected from a Koravan. Edrin kept going, because once he had started he found he could not stop. "It started when you were just a newborn. You were in the medical wing. You almost died twice. I had a dream and I went to see you and I touched you and something happened. I did not understand it then. I figured it out a few months later. I have been doing it since." The boy's hands had gone still on the table. "I am sorry I did not tell you," Edrin said. "I should have. I did not know how." The silence was long. Then the boy said quietly, "Show me." They walked to the garden together. It was a slow walk. Edrin did not say much because he was concentrating on his breathing, and the boy did not say anything because he was looking at the path. They reached the bench. Edrin sat. The boy sat beside him. The garden was empty. "Push fire," Edrin said. "Just a flame, nothing more." The boy held out his right hand and made a small flame above his palm. It was steady. It was always steady at first. "Hold it," Edrin said. The boy held it. After a minute the flame began to flicker, small, irregular pulses, the air channel beginning its usual interference. Edrin closed his eyes. He reached for it. He pulled a fraction across, not all of it, just enough for the boy to feel the difference. The flame steadied. The boy's hand went still. Valor stared at the flame. He looked at his father. He looked at the flame again. His father's eyes were still closed, his face the slack gray it went during a pull. The boy closed his hand around the flame and put it out. He stood up. He walked away from the bench, fast, not running but close to it. He turned the corner at the end of the path and was gone. Edrin opened his eyes. He sat on the bench for another half-hour before he could walk home. A week passed. The boy did not come. He did not appear in the garden, in the lane, nor at the apartment door. Edrin kept absorbing the excess power during training, and the week's absorptions were harder than usual because he was feeling extremely anxious that his son now hated him. He barely slept. He wrote nothing in the notebook. He became a shell of himself. On the 8th night, late, after the household had gone quiet, there was a knock at the door. Valor was on the step. His eyes were red. He had not been crying when he knocked, but he had been crying earlier, perhaps for hours. He came in without speaking. He sat at the kitchen table. Edrin made tea. He set it in front of his son. He sat down across from him. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then the boy said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Edrin had thought about this question all week. "I didn't think you needed to worry about it," he said. "You had enough responsibility to carry. I thought if you knew, you would feel guilty, and the guilt would make the channels harder to manage, and you would have less of a chance to survive." The boy was looking at the table. "And I had been doing it alone for so long," Edrin said, "that I did not know how to do it any other way. Being seen meant being expected to explain myself. To your mother. To the clan. I was afraid of what would happen if anyone knew. I was afraid they would stop caring for you." The boy nodded slowly. He said, "I have been embarrassed of you for years." Edrin nodded back. "I know. I thought you were weak. I thought my mother had married badly. I thought you came to my events because you wanted attention from us." The boy's voice was even and small. "I was cold to you on purpose. I made my friends laugh about you once. I told my grandfather I did not want you at my 12th year ceremony." "It is all right," Edrin said. The boy looked up. His eyes were wet. "It is not all right." He put his head down on his arms on the table and stayed there for a long time. Edrin sat with him and did not touch him, because he did not know whether the boy wanted to be touched, and because his own hands were not steady enough to be of any use. When the boy finally lifted his head, he said, "I am going to come here. I am going to come a lot." Edrin said, "All right," while a tear fell down his face. The visits started semi-frequently at first, then twice a week, then 3 times. The boy came in the afternoons after his training and sat at the kitchen table and did his reading while Edrin moved through the apartment. He brought food from the household kitchen: bread, fruit, cured meat, sometimes a hot dish wrapped in cloth that he had carried across the gardens. He set them on the counter without comment. Edrin ate them. The boy noticed things: the chart on the wall, the notebook, the way his father stopped in doorways for a moment before moving through them, the way Edrin would sometimes go very still in the middle of a sentence and not move for a minute before resuming. He started asking questions. "How long does an absorption last in your body?" Edrin told him. "A small one hours, a medium one days, a bad one weeks." "What does fire feel like compared to water?" Edrin told him. "Fire ran through the ribs and stayed there. Water settled in the lungs and felt like drowning slowly. Earth was a weight in the bones, particularly the hips. Air was the worst. Air thinned the inside of him out, made his breathing shallow, made his thinking slow." "What is the worst one you have gone through?" Edrin thought for a long time before answering. The worst one was a winter when Valor was 6 and had developed a fever none of the healers could place. The fever had been an elemental overload coming from all 4 channels at once. Edrin had absorbed steadily for 11 days. He had been bedridden for 2 months afterward. Tommen had moved into the apartment for that period and took care of him. The boy listened to all of these answers without interrupting. He started bringing his sparring instructors training manuals and reading them at the kitchen table. He showed Edrin the diagrams and asked his father to explain how spirit bending might have interacted with the 4 elements, in theory, since Edrin had read about it more than anyone else the boy knew. Edrin told him the little he knew. The boy listened and took notes in the margins of the manuals. They began to take walks. Short ones at first, the river path, the lower gardens. They did not talk much. Edrin walked slowly because his body required it, and the boy walked slowly to match him. After a few months, the boy stopped noticing he was walking slowly, and Edrin stopped apologizing for it. In the spring of the boy's 13th year, on one of the walks, he asked, "Does Mother know?" "No." "Why didn't you tell her?" Edrin walked for a few steps before answering. He had thought about this for a long time, and the answer had not changed. "There was a time when I might have," he said. "When you were a baby, when she was still talking to me. But Halrin had just died and she was learning to be the heir, and she was angry at the clan, at the world, at me for being in her life when her brother was not in it. I could not have told her then. After that, time passed. There was never a moment when bringing it up would have been clean. She would want to know. I am not sure she would. The boy walked beside him for a while. She is not what you think, Valor said. She is tired, she is not unkind. I know. She asks about you sometimes. Not often, but she asks. Edrin had not known this. He did not say anything. The boy did not push it. They finished the walk and went back to the apartment, and Valor did his reading at the kitchen table while Edrin made dinner. The boy turned 14. He had grown. He was taller than Edrin now, which had happened sometime over the previous year and which neither of them had remarked on. His training had intensified. He was being prepared for the formal Heir confirmation that would happen at 16, and the demands on his power had increased. The absorptions were longer and harder. Edrin had begun losing weight again, not as fast as in the early years, but steadily. The chart on the wall was no longer charting recovery. It was charting a slow downward line. He had not shown it to the boy. Valor had probably looked at it anyway. One afternoon in the autumn, Valor sat at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me about the spirit benders." Edrin made tea. He sat down. He told the boy what he knew, which was not very much. His grandfather had spoken of an ant who could do small things, calm a sick animal by touching it, ease the pain of a dying man. His own father had told him not to expect anything. The bloodline had been thinning for 4 generations by the time Edrin was born, and there was no one alive who could teach him anything, and the family had decided to let the inheritance go. They thought it was gone, Edrin said. It was not gone. It was very thin. You have done 11 years of the hardest work in this clan with it. Edrin did not have an answer for that. The boy said, "You are not the end of it." He said it plainly as a statement. Edrin looked at his hands on the table. He thought about his grandfather who had told him stories. He thought about his father. He thought about himself at 12, knowing he was the last of something that had once mattered. He thought about his son sitting across from him, 14 years old, taller than him, telling him he was not the end of it. He did not know what to say. He nodded. The boy let it go. The seasons turned. Valor turned 15. The visits to the apartment had become routine. He came almost every day now in the late afternoon after his training. The household had begun to notice. His mother had asked him once lightly where he went in the afternoons. He had said he was studying. She had not pressed. His grandfather had asked more directly, and Valor had lied. His grandfather had been suspicious but had not been able to prove anything. The boy had become skilled at lying. He did not enjoy it. He talked to his father about it sometimes on the walks. "I do not like lying to her," he said once. "I know. But I am not ready to tell her yet." "You do not have to. You should not have to live like this." "I have lived like this for a long time. That does not make it fair or just." Edrin did not answer. The boy did not push. Late spring. He had come to the apartment in the evening and had stayed for dinner. He had brought ingredients from the household kitchen because Edrin's pantry had been empty lately, and he had sat at the table while his father cooked. They did not talk much. They had reached the stage of the relationship where silence was comfortable. Edrin set the plate in front of his son. He sat down with his own. The boy ate. Edrin watched him for a moment. The boy looked up. "You should not be living here alone," he said. Edrin set down his fork. "I am fine living here alone." "You are not fine. You have not been fine for years. You stop in doorways. You brace against the counter. You sleep 14 hours after a bad day. There is no one here when you are on the floor." Tommen comes by. Tommen is 62. Tommen should not be the only person who knows where you live. Edrin looked at his son. The boy was looking back at him steadily. The gray eyes, Celira's eyes, held him with a new authority. "Valor." "I am not asking yet," the boy said. "I am telling you that I am going to ask, and that when I ask I am not going to take no for an answer." Edrin did not answer. The boy went back to his food. He ate the rest of his dinner without speaking. Edrin ate slowly across from him and watched him eat, and he understood that something had shifted, and that the next round of his life was going to look different than this one. The boy finished. He stood up. He took both plates to the sink and washed them, as he had begun doing this past year, because washing dishes had become hard for his father on bad days. "I will come tomorrow," Valor said at the door. "All right." Edrin sat at the kitchen table. The kitchen table he had sat at alone for 11 years. The kitchen table his son had now sat at almost every afternoon for nearly 4, and he thought about what was coming. He did not know what to feel. He had spent so long being unseen that now it still felt unreal. His son was part of his life. He felt relieved but also so very tired. He cleared the rest of the table and went to bed. He slept better than he had in months. Chapter 4. What he brought home. Valor came the next afternoon, as he had said. He did not bring food this time. He came carrying a folded paper, and he set it on the kitchen table and sat down across from his father. Edrin looked at the paper. He did not pick it up. "What is this?" Edrin said. "An appointment with the senior healer of the household, tomorrow afternoon. I do not see Koravan healers." "You will see this one." Edrin did not answer at first. He had been awake for most of the night thinking about what was coming, and he had decided several things, and one of them was that he was going to fight this, because he did not want his son to suffer for him. "Valor, the senior healer is your grandfather's healer. She has known me for 16 years. She has not spoken to me in 12. She is not going to see me as a patient. She is going to see me as a problem your grandfather is going to want to disappear. She has agreed to see you privately. She has agreed not to report it. Healers in this house do not keep that kind of confidence. This one will." "How?" "I asked her." Edrin looked at his son. "You asked her?" "Yes." "And she agreed." "She agreed because I am the heir, and because she has been the senior healer of this household for 20 years and she knows when something is being kept from her. She has known something for years. She did not have confirmation which I gave her." Edrin sat very still. "You told her?" "Not all of it. I told her my father has been ill for a long time and I want him examined. I told her there are things she will see that I do not want her to discuss with anyone in this house. She agreed. She is not stupid, father. She is going to make her own conclusions when she examines you. I will deal with that later." Edrin set his hand on the table. The left one had begun trembling again, the steady fine tremor that had been with him for 3 years now. He watched it move and did not say anything for a long time. "I do not want this," he said finally. "I know. I have been doing this in private my whole life. I know. You are taking that from me." The boy did not look away. "Yes," he said, "I am." Edrin went to the appointment begrudgingly. He went because he had run out of arguments, and because his son had asked him to, and because in the night between the dinner and the appointment he had registered that his son was not going to stop, and that holding the line was going to cost more energy than he had. The healer's name was Myra. She had been much younger when Edrin had first come to the Koravan estate, the year of his marriage, and now she was in her 50s with silver hair. She examined him for an hour and a half. She took his pulse at 3 different points. She listened to his breathing through a long curved tube. She pressed her fingers along his ribs and his abdomen and the line of his spine. She drew a small amount of his blood into a glass vial and held the vial up to the window light. She asked him to walk across the room 3 times. When she was done, she sat down across from him at the small table in her office and looked at him for a full minute without speaking. "Mr. Edrin," she said. "Yes." You should be dead. He did not answer. You are not dead. You are not even close to dead, which is what surprises me. You are very ill. You have been very ill for a long time, I can only presume. The pattern of damage in your body is not a pattern I recognize. It is also not consistent with any disease I have read about. Your channels are doing something I cannot describe. I see. Your son tells me he does not want me to discuss this with anyone. That is what he tells me also. I am going to honor that because he is the heir of this house and because I have grown fond of him over the years. I am also going to tell you that I cannot treat what I do not understand. I can give you tonics. I can monitor you. I can make sure you eat. I cannot reverse what is happening because I cannot identify what is happening. I have not asked you to reverse it. Your son has. Edrin looked at his hands. He has not asked me, he said. He has asked you, those are not the same thing. Myra watched him for a moment. You have something I will not ask about, she said quietly. I am a healer, I keep what I see, but I will tell you this one thing because I think you need to hear it from someone other than your son. Whatever you have been doing, whatever you are doing, your body is not going to last another decade at this rate, possibly not another 5 years. If you slow down, you might. If you stop, you almost certainly will. I cannot stop. I gathered as much. I am telling you what I see. Edrin nodded. Thank you, he said. She gave him 3 new tonics. She gave him a schedule. She told him she would see him every 2 weeks. She told him to come through the side entrance after the household was asleep, and to use the name Eden on the door log and not to speak to anyone in the corridors. He thanked her again and walked home. He did not tell Valor what she had said about the 5 years. 2 weeks later, Valor sat at the kitchen table and said, I want you to move into my quarters. Edrin had been waiting for that. No, Edrin simply said. I have already had the second bedroom prepared. It is on the south side of the building. The light is good. There is a private bath. Myra can come in through the heir's wing without explanation, since she sees me regularly. There is a staff member who will bring food. There are people in the building all the time, so when you are suffering, someone will be near. Valor. You will eat, you will rest, you will be where I can see you. I cannot move into your quarters. I am your father. I am Selira's husband. I am living in this apartment for a reason. What reason? Discretion, the arrangement that was made, the clan would. The clan does not run my life. The clan runs everything. They permitted me into this apartment as a kindness. They will not permit me into the heir's quarters at all. The boy was very still. They do not permit me, Valor said. I am the heir. I do as I see fit within my own quarters. You are 15. I am 15, and I have been the formal Corvin heir for 6 years, and the second bedroom of my apartment is mine to assign. I have assigned it to you. Your grandfather will object. Yes. Your mother will be told. Yes. This is going to become a thing the clan talks about. I know. Edrin sat at the table for a long time. The boy did not push him. He had learned over the last 4 years that pushing did not work on his father, only waiting did. Edrin said, I have lived alone for 15 years. I know. I do not know how to live with someone. You are not going to be living with me. You are going to be living next to me in the same building. You have your own room and your own door. It is still different. Yes. Another silence. You are doing this because of what Myra said, Edrin said. Yes. What did she tell you? The same thing she told you, more or less. She told me you would not last another 5 years if you kept living the way you have been. I asked her not to tell you. She did not tell me everything on her own. I am not stupid, father. I knew what she would find. One simply has to look at you to know that something is terribly wrong. Edrin closed his eyes. I do not want to be moved. I know. I want to be left where I am. I know. You are going to do it anyway. Yes. The boy waited. Edrin opened his eyes. He looked at his son across the kitchen table. The boy was 15, taller than him, and he was looking at his father steadily. All right, Edrin said. The move took a couple of hours. There was almost nothing to move. The clothes, the notebook, the chart from the wall, the 3 rows of bottles, the book he had bought at the second-hand shop and never read. Edrin packed it all into one trunk and one cloth bag, and Tommen carried them across the gardens at dawn on a Tuesday before most of the household was awake. Tommen had said almost nothing when Edrin had told him. He had nodded once, finished his tea, and the next morning he had been at the door at 5 with the trunk already empty and ready. When the bag was at the doorway of the apartment Edrin had lived in for 15 years, Edrin stopped and looked around the rooms one more time. The kitchen table, the window through which he had watched the eastern wing, the chair where his son had sat almost every afternoon for the last year. Tommen waited at the door without speaking. All right, Edrin said. He locked the door behind him. He gave the key to Tommen, who would return it to the household steward. They walked across the gardens in the early light. The heirs' quarters were on the second floor of the central building, and they were larger than Edrin's entire apartment. The second bedroom was as Vaylor had described, south-facing, with good light, a small private bath, a bed that was clean and made up, a single chair by the window. Vaylor had set a small framed sketch on the bedside table, a drawing he had made himself years ago, of a tree in the lower garden, a school assignment. Edrin had never seen it. He stood in the room for a moment. Vaylor was at the doorway. He did not say anything. It is nice, Edrin said. It is a simple room. It is nicer than where I came from. That is not a high bar. Edrin smiled. He sat down on the chair by the window slowly, and the boy went and got him water from the kitchen of the heir's wing without being asked. The clan found out within 2 days. The first to arrive was Celira's senior aunt, who had been the family's social arbiter for 30 years, and who came up to the heir's quarters in the middle of the afternoon with the formal smile she used when she was about to deliver a clan correction. Vaylor met her at the door. Vaylor, dear, she said, I understand you have made an unusual housing decision. Yes, Aunt Verissa. Your father is. In residence, yes. Vaylor. Aunt Verissa, I am not going to discuss this in the corridor. Please come in or please send word through the household steward. He stepped aside. She did not come in. She looked at him for a long moment and then she turned and walked back down the stairs. And within an hour, the entire clan knew that Vaylor had moved his father into the heir's quarters and that the boy had been short with the senior aunt about it. His grandfather summoned him that evening. Vaylor went. Edrin did not go. Edrin sat at the kitchen table of the heir's wing and ate the dinner that the kitchen staff had brought, and he waited. When Vaylor came back 2 hours later, he looked tired. He sat down at the table across from his father and did not speak for a few minutes. Then he said, Grandfather is unhappy. I know. He did not forbid it. He cannot forbid it within my quarters, but he has explicitly stated his displeasure. What did you say? I said you are my father. I said I am the heir and I have decided. I said the decision is not open for review. What did he say to that? He said the clan is going to have questions. I said they are welcome to ask them, and I will answer the ones I want to answer. Edrin nodded slowly. You are going to make trouble for yourself. I have already made trouble for myself. It is going to get worse. Yes, I know. Edrin watched his son eat. The boy ate slowly tonight, which was how he ate when he was thinking. After a while, Edrin said, Why did you do this, the way you did it, so fast, so publicly? The boy set down his fork. "Because I have been quiet about you for years," he said, "and quiet was not making you better. Quiet was letting you stay in that apartment until you died there. I am done being quiet. If the clan has a problem with you living here, the clan can take it up with me, and I will spend the rest of my life fighting for you." He went back to eating. Edrin sat across from him and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. The first time he walked the estate with his son, openly, was 4 days after the move. Vaylor had a meeting with one of the junior elders about the spring training schedule, and the meeting was at the lower training pavilion across the gardens, and Vaylor said at breakfast, "Walk with me." "To the meeting?" "Yes, wait outside. I will not be long." "Vaylor, if I walk with you across the gardens, every member of this clan who is awake is going to see us." "Yes." "You are doing this on purpose, aren't you?" "Yes." Edrin set down his cup. "Why?" "Because they need to see you. Because I am tired of you being a man people pretend does not exist. Because the next time you absorb power during one of my training sessions, I want every person in this clan to understand who you are and what you have been doing. They have to acknowledge you." Edrin sat with this for a moment. "Walk with me," Vaylor said again. He walked with his son. They went down the central staircase together. The two stewards at the bottom of the stairs looked up. They looked at Vaylor, then at Edrin, then quickly back at their work. They went out through the main doors. A pair of cousins were sitting in the front courtyard. The cousins stopped talking. Vaylor nodded at them. They nodded back slowly and watched the two men walk past. They went across the gardens. They passed the senior gardener who had known Edrin for 15 years and had never spoken to him. The gardener looked up. Vaylor said good morning. The gardener said good morning back, and then said, after a half-second pause, "Good morning to you both," which was the first acknowledgement Edrin had received from a member of the household staff in over a decade. They reached the lower training pavilion. Vaylor said, "Wait here, it will be 20 minutes." Edrin sat on a stone bench. He watched his son go inside the pavilion and understood that his life has now changed. Vaylor came back out 20 minutes later. They walked back across the gardens together. The gardener nodded to them again. The cousins were still in the front courtyard. They went up the central staircase. The stewards looked up and nodded. In the heir's quarters, Edrin sat down on the chair by the window and did not move for a while. Vaylor said, "Are you all right?" "I am tired." "You did well." "I did not do anything." "You walked next to me, that was enough." Celira found out a week later. She had been traveling. There had been a trade conference in the eastern province, and she had been gone for 10 days, and the clan had been keeping the news of Edrin's move out of the messages she received, because the senior aunt had decided to handle it in person when she returned. She came home in the evening. Vaylor met her at the door. He told her briefly and directly what he had done. She listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she said, "Where is he?" "In my quarters, the south bedroom." "I am going to see him." "All right." She walked up the central staircase alone. Vaylor did not follow. Edrin was in the room by the window. He had heard her arrival from the courtyard and had been waiting for the knock at the door. It came, he said, "Come in." She came in. She had aged. She was 40 now, and she had been carrying the weight of the heir position for 15 years. Her hair was still pinned in the older style. She was still beautiful. She stood in the doorway. She did not come further into the room. "Edrin." "Celira." "My son has moved you into his quarters." "Yes." "He is very protective of you." "Yes." She looked at him for a long time. She was reading his face. Edrin held still. "I heard that you are very ill," she said. "Yes." "How long have you been ill?" He almost lied. He almost said some time. What he said instead, because his son was counting on him to tell the truth, was 15 years. She did not move. She did not speak for a long minute. Then she said, "I think we should talk." "Yes." "Not now. Not now. Soon. Whenever you wish." She nodded once. She turned and walked out of the room, and Edrin heard her footsteps go down the central staircase, and a few minutes later he heard her say something to Vaylor in the kitchen in a voice too low for him to make out the words. He sat by the window for a long time after that. That night late, after the household was quiet, Vaylor came into Edrin's room without knocking and sat down on the foot of the bed. Edrin was awake. He had not slept yet. "She is going to want a long conversation," Vaylor said. "I know. Are you ready for it?" "No." "All right. How was she?" "Quiet. She did not yell. She did not cry. She asked me 3 questions and I answered them. She said she needed to think." "That sounds like her." "Yes." The boy sat at the foot of the bed for a while without speaking. Edrin watched him in the dim light. "Vaylor." "Yes." "Thank you." The boy did not answer right away. He looked at his hands, then at the window, then at his father. "You are welcome," he said. He stood up and went back to his own room. Edrin lay in the bed and looked at the ceiling and fell asleep after a while. Epilogue: what he carried away. Celira and Edrin spoke 3 times that summer. The first conversation was in the small reception room of her wing, late in the evening, with a pot of tea between them that neither of them drank. She asked him to tell her everything. He told her. He did not soften any of it. She listened without interrupting, her habit when she was angry and her habit when she was grieving, and Edrin had never been able to tell which was which. When he was finished, she said, "I did not know." "I know. I should have known. You were doing other work. That is not an excuse." She had cried then, quietly, holding it back so it would not show. Edrin had not gone to her. He had sat across the table and let her cry, because he understood by then that she was not crying for him. The second conversation was a week later, on the central terrace. She said she was sorry. She said she should have looked harder. She said she had been so angry at the world after Halrin died that she had decided not to look at him at all, because looking at him meant feeling things she did not have room to feel. He told her he understood. He meant it. He had understood it for years. The third conversation was at the end of the summer in the gardens, walking the long path along the south wall. She asked if there was a way back for them. He thought about it for a long time before answering. He told her he did not know. He told her that he had loved her once, and that some part of him still did, but he was very tired, and he was not sure it could grow back into anything. He told her that he had spent 15 years being a man who was rejected and ignored. She had listened. She had nodded. She had said, "Take whatever time you need." He had thanked her. They had finished the walk. They had not talked about it again that summer. Vaylor was 16. He had passed his formal heir coronation in the spring, the 4-element demonstration that the clan had been preparing him for since he was 9. He had performed all 4 sequences cleanly, and the heir channel had held without intervention for the first time in his life. Edrin had sat at the back of the council hall, as he had 5 years before, and had not absorbed anything. The boy had done it himself. The training schedule had eased. The boy was still pushed, but no longer past the line where his body could not hold what was being asked of it. The instabilities had become rare. The worst incidents were 3 or 4 months apart now, and even those were smaller, and most of them the boy could ride out without help. Edrin still absorbed some elements when it was needed, but he was needed less and less. His own body had stopped declining slowly. Myra had adjusted the tonics. He had gained back some weight. The chart on the wall, which he kept in a drawer now, because he no longer needed to look at it every day, showed a line that had flattened and had been flat for almost 6 months. He was not better. He would never be better. But he had stopped being worse, which was a thing he had not been able to imagine for a long time. He told Valor in the autumn. They were at the kitchen table late in the evening and the boy was studying for an examination. Edrin had been thinking about it for weeks. He had thought about how to say it. He had decided, finally, that there was no clever way to say it and that the boy had earned straight answers. I think I am going to leave for a while. Valor looked up from his book. Leave? Not far, not forever. I want to travel for a year, maybe 2. Why? Because I have lived in this estate for over 16 years, and I do not know who I am outside of it. I have been cooped up for so long that I am not sure what I am when I am not helping you. I would like to find out. Valor closed the book. You are leaving me. No, I am leaving the estate. I am not leaving you. That is the same thing. It is not. The boy looked at him for a long moment, his face shifting through several emotions, and Edrin held still but smiled gently. How long? Valor said. I do not know, a year, maybe more. I will write. I will come back for the things that matter, the winter ceremony, your 17th year, whenever you ask me to. Are you going alone? Yes. Where? I am not sure yet. South, probably. There is a coast I have always wanted to see. There are spirit bender records in one of the southern archives my grandfather mentioned once. I would like to read them. You are going to look for the bloodline. Some of it. Mostly I am going to walk somewhere I have never walked and see if I am still a person at the end of it. The boy was quiet for a while. Then he said, When are you leaving? Spring, after the New Year ceremonies. That's in 6 months. Yes. All right. All right. What do you want me to say? That I will not allow it. I am not your father, father. I am your son. You have done enough for me. If you need to go, you should go. Edrin looked at his hands. I was not sure how to ask. You did not need to ask. I wanted to. Valor reached across the table and put his hand on his father's. His hand was warm and dry and a little larger than Edrin's. You should have asked yourself a long time ago, Valor said. I am glad you finally did. He left in the spring. He took one bag. He took the notebook. He did not take the chart because Myra had told him he no longer needed to keep one. He took the framed sketch of the tree on the bedside table. Celira saw him off in the front courtyard. She did not say much. She held him at the shoulders for a moment and looked at him, and she said, Come back when you are ready. I will. Whether or not you are ready for me, you should still come back. He understood what she meant. He nodded. He told her he would write. Valor walked him as far as the eastern gate. They did not talk on the walk. At the gate, the boy stopped. I will write to you every week, Edrin said. Every 2 weeks is fine. Every week. All right. You will be all right. I know. If anything happens, anything bad, you send word and I come back, no matter where I am. I know. Edrin looked at his son for a moment. I love you, son, Edrin said. It was the first time he had said it. I know, Valor said. I love you too, Dad. It was the first time he had said it. Edrin nodded once. He turned and walked through the gate. He did not look back, because looking back was not a thing he needed to do. The boy was where he should be. Celira was where she had always been. The estate was behind him and the road was ahead, and his body, for the first time in 16 years, was carrying only what belonged to him. He walked south through the morning slowly, because his body still required it, and because there was no one waiting for him to arrive, and because he had nowhere he needed to be by any particular hour. By evening, He was further from the estate than he had been in 2 decades. He sat by a small fire he had built himself, and he ate a meal he had cooked himself, and he watched the stars come up over a sky he did not recognize. He thought about his son. He thought about Celira and what she had said in the courtyard and whether he would ever trust her again. He thought about the man he had been at 23 before any of this and whether anything was left of him. He did not know, but he wanted to find out. What is to give light must endure burning. Viktor E. Frankl. Thank you for listening to Hollow Inheritance. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to hear more, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. New stories are uploaded every Friday.